The bell in the stable tower had not been rung since the old Duke was carried to the church, and when it started up that gray afternoon, most of the parish took the sound for thunder. Eloan did not. She had walked the embankment above the mere every morning for 3 days, with a brass rule in her pocket and her skirts pinned out of the mud, and she had watched the brown water climb the marker stones 1 cold inch at a time. She had written each figure in a small book. Figures did not lie, and neither did water. Both of them found their level in the end, whatever a man might wish otherwise. By that morning, the flood stood a hand's breadth below the lip of a bank that had not been faced with new stone in 9 years, though the estate had paid to have it done twice. When the first dark seam opened in the turf, she was already running. The seam was low on the water side, a wet mouth no wider than her hand, and it was weeping. She had grown up in the fens where her father raised banks for a living, and she knew a weeping bank was already lost. The only question was where it would give and what it would take. Below her stood the tithe barn with the whole gathered harvest in it, and beyond it the 8 cottages of low fold, and in them the old and the very young who could not run. The men were in the wrong place, 15 of them on the crown of the high bank, throwing sods into a breach that had not yet opened, shouting each other down. Panic always ran uphill, away from the danger and toward the noise. "Leave it," Eloan said. She did not shout. She had learned long ago that a raised voice is only fear wearing a louder coat. She put herself between the men and the water and made them look at her instead. "Leave the high bank. It will hold another hour. It is here that will go, and when it goes it takes the barn and the fold." "Then we've lost it, mistress," said Tobias Wren, the old foreman, and he was not arguing. He was grieving in advance. "We have not." She had the brass rule out, now her father's, the brass gaunt soft gold with 40 years of handling, and she laid it against the marker stone, and let them all see the number for themselves. The barn floor stands 4 feet above the fold. If the water takes the low meadow, it never reaches the cottages, and it never reaches the corn. So we give it the low meadow. We cut the bank ourselves, here, clean, where we choose, before the mere cuts it, where it chooses. For a moment nobody moved. She was asking them to break the very thing they had spent the afternoon trying to save. "You'll drown the hay," someone said. "I will drown the hay," Eloan agreed. "Hay grows again by June. Ashby's grandchildren do not." She was already down on her knees in the mud, marking the cut with the edge of the rule, 2 clean lines, a spade's width apart. Wren, 6 men with mattocks, here to here, the rest to the fold. Carry out the beds, the old people, the pig if there's time and the child if there's not. Go now, and go quietly. Frightened men, break banks. Careful men cut them. They went. That was the strange thing, and the men spoke of it for a year after. That a soaked woman on her knees in the clay, giving up ground on purpose, was easier to believe than all their own shouting. The mattocks bit. The cut opened. And when the brown water found the gap she had made for it, it went where she had told it to go. Down the graded fall of the low meadow and out across the drowned hay in a wide brown sheet, spreading, slowing, harmless, while the barn stood dry on its 4 feet of grace, and the last old man came out of the fold on Wren's back. Eloan stood up out of the mud. She was wet through to the skin, her hands were bleeding where the rule had bitten, and the whole of the low ground behind her was a shining brown lake going gold under a sky that had, absurdly, begun to clear. She did not feel triumphant. She felt only the flat, cold thing she always felt when a sum came out right, that it might so easily not have. That was the moment the carriage came down the north drive. It was a traveling chaise, mud to the axles, 4 horses hard driven, 3 gentlemen inside it in the bright coats of men, a long way from London, and not enjoying the last of it. It drew up on the rise above the ruined meadow, and the gentlemen put their heads out to look at the flood, and at the small barn standing dry in the middle of it, and at the woman in the gray gown who stood between the two, with a brass rule hanging from her hand. "Good heavens," said one of them, a fair man with a bored, handsome face. "The place is half drowned, Windmarch. Is this what you brought us 300 miles to see?" The man beside him did not answer at once. He was the tallest of the three, and the quietest, dark-haired and travel-worn, with the still, shut face of a man who had spent 4 years teaching himself to feel as little as possible. He was the Duke of Windmarch, and he had not set his boots on his own land since the morning after his wedding. He looked down at the drowned meadow and the dry barn and the woman with the rule, and something crossed his face that he could not name and did not like. "Who is that?" the fair man asked. "The one giving the orders." "Handsome, in a drowned cat sort of way. A tenant's wife," the Duke of Windmarch went on, looking at her for a moment longer. "No," he said at last slowly, as a man says a thing he has just this instant remembered and cannot quite believe. "No, I think that is my wife." The fair man laughed, thinking it a joke. It was not a joke. "I had forgotten," he said to the three of the men, to no one, "that I had a wife at all." And he opened the carriage door and stepped down into the mud of his own country, 4 years too late to be introduced to the woman he had married and left. That night, when the fold was dry and the beasts were fed and the great house had swallowed its returned master and his London friends behind lit windows, Elowen went up to the small room in the north gable that was hers and bolted the door. She did not go to the fire. She went to the corner, where her father's writing box stood, an ugly iron-bound thing he had carried to every drainage works in 3 counties, and she knelt and worked the catch that was not the real catch, and lifted the false floor that no maid had ever found, and no man would ever think to look for beneath a woman's darning wool. Under it lay her whole second life, kept in her own small, even hand. There was a book of accounts that were nobody's business but hers, the egg money and the still-room money and the little her father had left her, all of it saved and turned and grown, a little at a time across 4 silent years. There were letters from a careful attorney in Kelby who addressed her always as Madam, and never once by her title. And there was a deed, folded in oilskin, to a low stone cottage on Senate's Drove in the fen country where she had been born, bought back into her own maiden name of Carow. 2 rooms and an acre and a stretch of good black soil, hers, entire, beholden to no one. That was the thing she had built in the dark while the county thought her a placeholder, not a rebellion, an exit. She had been 18 when they married her to the Duke of Windmarch, a match made by lawyers between his debts and her dowry, a thing arranged over her head like weather, he had said, his vows looking at the middle distance. He had ridden south to his regiment the next morning without breakfasting, and in 4 years she had had of him 1 line and another man's writing settling, her allowance, and silence, and silence. And she had understood very early what she was to him, a signature on a contract, a name he need never think of again. So she had decided in her first hard winter that she would not wither into a wife nobody wanted. She would make herself, quietly, into a woman who did not need the marriage at all. And on the day he came home, for men like him came home in the end, to sell up or to secure an heir, she would have her own roof and her own name ready, and ask him courteously to let her go and walk out of Windmarch owing nothing to anyone. She had planned it for 4 years. She had not planned for today. She sat back on her heels with the oilskin deed in her hands and made herself look plainly at what had changed, because a woman who lies to herself keeps poor accounts. He had come home. That much was to plan, but he had not come home to a placeholder he could sign away in an afternoon. He had come home to a wife the whole parish had watched save the harvest that morning, and a wife the parish had begun to reckon with was a far harder thing to quietly release than a wife nobody knew. She had made herself visible in order to be safe. She saw now, too late, that visible and free were not always the same country. She folded the deed back into its oilskin, Then she took out the attorney's last letter and read again the single line that had made her hands go still that afternoon before ever the carriage came. The line that said the release she wanted could not in law be had for the asking, that the door she had spent 4 years building would open only if His Grace Himself chose to open it. Everything she had built to be free of him now waited, after all, on his hand. She had known for a year that Winmarch was being robbed. The flood had only made it stand up in daylight where anyone might see it. A bank did not weep from age alone. It wept because for 9 years, the stone that should have faced it had been carted in on paper and never once laid in fact. Elowen had walked that bank 100 mornings, and she had read its true condition the way she read a column of figures. And she had known that the money for its facing went out of the estate every Michaelmas in good black ink, and went into no bank at all, into no name at all, and that one wet autumn it would cost the parish its harvest. It very nearly had. She had stood between the flood and the fold that afternoon, holding back, with a brass rule and 15 frightened men, the exact price of another man's patience. The other man was Mr. Vosper. He had come to Winmarch as land agent the year the old Duke died, a soft-spoken, pleasant, careful man of middle age, who smiled with real warmth and remembered the name of every tenant's child. In the young Duke's long absence, he had made himself, gently and without ever once raising his voice, into the whole government of the place. He held the estate books. He held the rent rolls and the tradesmen's accounts. He held the keys to the muniment room where the deeds were kept, and this was the heart of it. He held the Duke's own authority, because a master who never came home and never read a letter is a master whose name can be written by another hand. 4 years of unread letters. 4 years of a signature nobody checked. Vosper had not needed to be bold. He had only needed to be trusted and unwatched, and he had been both. Elowen had gathered what she could, quietly, the only way open to a wife with no standing, a figure here, a tenant's grumble there, the true price of a thing set against the price the books confessed. She kept it all in the iron box under the darning wool, beside her own freedom, a shilling of proof at a time. She had told herself it was not her fight. She was leaving. She meant to walk out of Winmarch and let it rob itself blind behind her, and none of it would be her affair. She had very nearly believed it, right up until she stood in the drowned meadow that afternoon and watched an old man carried dry out of a cottage, whose roof Vosper had charged the estate to mend 3 winters running and had never touched. Now she stood at her cold window with a single candle, and she made herself add up the thing she had been refusing to add up, and the sum frightened her more than the flood had. For that evening, going down the back stair with a jug, she had passed the estate office and heard Vosper's pleasant voice through the door, speaking not to a servant but to a stranger from Kelby, a man of law, by his talk, and she had heard quite clearly 3 words that did not belong in the mouth of an honest agent. An asterisk before he reads asterisk, before he reads. Before the Duke of Winmarch, home 4 years too soon for Mr. Vosper's comfort, sat down at last with the books he had never opened, Vosper was not merely skimming a river of shillings off a sleeping estate. He was selling pieces of it outright, under a signature that was not the Duke's, and he was racing now to finish before his master woke. The flood had woken the parish. The Duke's own return had started a clock, and the one person in the house who understood what the ticking meant was a wife who had come home that afternoon covered in mud, spent 4 years making herself ready to leave, and had just discovered that the man who held all the keys had seen her save the harvest, and had marked, in that pleasant, unhurried way of his, exactly how dangerous a watching woman could be. There was one person at Winmarch who had never once treated Elowen as furniture, and he was the last person in the house anyone thought to consult. His name was Colonel Hartness, and he was the old Duke's younger brother, the returned Duke's uncle, a spare, upright man of 70-odd, who had lost most of his hearing to the guns at some battle nobody living remembered, and who lived now in 3 rooms of the west wing that the household called, not unkindly, the deaf wing. The world had decided long ago that a man who could not hear was a man who need not be told anything. This suited the colonel very well. People said a great deal in front of a deaf man that they would never say in front of a listening one, and the colonel, who read lips like a scholar reads Latin, had spent 9 years learning exactly how his family was being quietly ruined, and had been able to do nothing about it but watch. Eloan had discovered him in her first winter, when she carried up a scuttle of coal that no one else had troubled to send. She had spoken to him plainly, facing him so he could see her mouth, as though his silence were worth talking into. No one had done that in years. He had looked at her a long moment, and then said in the too flat voice of a man who cannot hear himself, "You are the only person in this house who does not shout at me, as though noise were the same as sense. Sit down." They had been allies ever since, in the guarded way of two people who have each learned that the world's low estimate of them is the safest room to work behind. The morning after the flood she went up to him, and he was waiting because he had watched the whole of it from his high window. The cut bank, the drowned meadow, the barn standing dry. "You gave the mere a door," he said, "so it would not make one of its own. That was well done. My niece Sidonie would have thought of it." He stopped. Sidonie had been his niece, the old duke's daughter, dead. These 4 years of a fever. It was her the returned duke would not speak of. The colonel did not often say her name. That he said it now was a kind of decoration, and Eloan took it as one. "They will thank Wren for it," she said. "That suits me. I am leaving in the spring." The colonel looked at her with his pale, exact eyes. "No," he said, "you are not. You think you are. But you have just spent an afternoon in the mud, proving to yourself that you cannot bear to watch a thing go to ruin, that you know how to save, and this house is a great deal larger than one bank." He leaned forward. "Listen to me, since I cannot listen to you. My nephew came home yesterday with a head full of London and a heart 4 years asleep, and he will do one of two things. He will look at his estate, or he will not. If he does not, Vosper finishes his work, and there is nothing here in a 12-month but a sold-up shell and a duke who never understood what happened. If he does look, he will need someone at his elbow who already knows where the bodies are buried. That someone is you, girl, whether you meant to be or not." "I have no standing to be at anyone's elbow," Eloan said. "I am a wife," he forgot he had, "then gets standing." The old soldier said it as simply as an order on a field. "You are the Duchess of Wimmarch. It is the one card in your hand that Vosper cannot forge and cannot take, and you have spent 4 years refusing to pick it up, because picking it up meant staying. I am too deaf to fight this and too old to be believed. But no man in this county can tell a duchess to keep to the linen. Use the name. I will stand behind you as far as a deaf man can, and further than you think." He reached into the drawer of the table at his side, and took out a thing wrapped in flannel, and set it in her hands. It was a small iron key, old, worn, bright at the wards. "That is the second key to the muniment room," he said. "My brother had it cut before he died, because even he did not entirely trust his agents. Vosper does not know it exists. What is kept behind that door is the truth of who owns what at Wimmarch, and truth, my dear, is the one thing a forger cannot afford to have read. You wanted a door of your own. I am giving you a better one." His flat voice dropped. "Only be quick. You have started a clock, and so has he." Eloan did not use the key that week, nor the next. She had learned young that the surest way to lose a fight is to begin it before you are certain to win, and a half-built case, like a half-cut bank, does more harm than none at all. So she did the thing she was good at instead. She made herself necessary, one small, unarguable act at a time, and let the doing be its own argument. She began where a house always tells the truth first, which is below stairs, among the people who are paid to keep its secrets and never asked to keep their own counsel. She had the smoking kitchen chimney swept, a thing it had wanted for 2 years, and Vosper had never authorized because a smoking kitchen cost him nothing and a sweep cost 8 pence. She had the leaking scullery pump repacked. She sat with Mrs. Fenwick, the cook, over the week's marketing and found, without seeming to look for it, that the cook had been ashamed for a year of serving up meat that came in tired and dear, and could not say so, because Mr. Vosper settled with the butcher, and Mr. Vosper was not to be told his business by a woman with a ladle. "And who told you that?" Eloan asked, mildly, turning a column of the cook's own figures toward the light. "Why, Mr. Vosper," said Mrs. Moxt. Fenwick, and then hurt herself, and stopped. Eloan said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing. She only wrote the butcher's true price in the small book she now kept for the kitchen in her own hand, and she noticed, as she had known she would, that the price the butcher swore to at the door and the price the estate confessed to on Vosper's postage sheet were not the same price. Ran off the page, and out of the house, and into no name at all. She did not stop at the kitchen. She had the still room turned out and scoured, and at the back of it she found a shelf of cordials and rose-waters in a dead woman's neat round hand. Sidonie's, 4 years untouched, gone to cloud and ruin. She did not throw the jars away. She cleaned each one and kept the faded labels, because it seemed to her a mean thing to pour out the handwriting of the dead, and because she had begun to understand that this house had lost more than a mistress when it lost that girl. It had lost the one person who had ever looked at it and seen a thing worth tending. She turned to the linen. Next, she had the maids strike every press and wash and turn and mend the whole of it, and where the sheets had rotted past saving, she had them cut down for bandages and dusters so that nothing at Windmarch was thrown out that could still be made to serve. A plain thrift the estate had grown too grand to remember it could not do without. And when the colonel's baskets of broth and jelly wanted carrying down to the old people of the parish, it was Eloan who carried them, because a wife sitting idle in a cold house was a waste, and she could not abide waste. That was how she came to Lowfold and to Widow Aldous, 70 years old, who nursed a bedridden brother, and whose cottage roof led in the open sky, and whose rent had been raised at Lady Day, though nothing under heaven had been done to earn the raising. "Mr. Vosper says his grace has need of it," the old woman said without a shred of complaint, folding her swollen hands. "And his grace is a good man that lost his sister, poor soul, so I'll not grudge it. I only wonder the roof's never mended that we were charged the mending of 3 winters running. But I'll not trouble him with it, not with his grief." Loen stood in the doorway of the leaking cottage, with the jelly cooling in her hand, and understood, with a slow, cold anger, that this was the whole machine, a theft built, not on cleverness, but on the decency of good, frightened, grieving people, each too kind to make a fuss, while one pleasant man carried the difference quietly away. Ward of her moved through the house the way warmth moves through a cold room, slowly from the bottom, and without anyone announcing it. The 2 young housemaids began bringing their troubles to her, instead of weeping into the coal. Wren, who had grieved in advance on the bank, touched his hat to her now as he would to a mistress. Mrs. Fenwick cooked like a woman let out of a long confinement. Even the colonel's silent, watchful approval had a way of being felt. And there was a wager below stairs, of course, as there is in every great house when a new power appears. A shilling said the forgotten Duchess would be packed off south, by Lady Day quietly pensioned, the way inconvenient wives always were. The betting ran heavily against her. Eloan knew of it within 3 days, because a woman who has been overlooked all her life hears a great deal that louder people miss, and she did not resent it in the least. She had made the same bet herself, in a manner of speaking, the night she bought a cottage in her maiden name. She simply meant, quietly, to make the question the wager asked stop meaning anything at all. Mr. Vosper marked all of it. He did not smile less, he never smiled less. But he began, that fortnight, to keep his office door locked where before he had left it on the latch, and to be always somehow in the passage when Eloan passed through it, pleasant and unhurried, asking after her health, offering to spare her the trouble of the baskets, the marketing, the linen. In the mildest words in the world he offered, over and over, to take back out of her hands every small thread of the house she had begun to gather into them. She thanked him each time, and kept the threads, and understood that a man does not trouble to take a duster from a woman he truly believes to be harmless. The Duke, meanwhile, did not know what to do with his own house, and so did very little in it. He rose late. He rode out with his London friends over land he did not recognize as his own, and came back saying nothing. He dined alone at one end of a table too long for one man, in a silence so complete that the footman trod softly through it as through a sick room. He had not once in a week asked to see a ledger. He had not once gone into the East Wing where his sister had lived and died. He wore his grief the way some men wear a heavy coat indoors, miserably, and without seeming to know he might take it off. But he could not help noticing, because a man cannot live in a house and notice nothing, that the chimney no longer smoked at breakfast, that the coffee came hot, that the long dining table at which he ate alone had, one evening, quietly lost its extra leaves, so that his single place was laid at a modest span of oak instead of at the foot of 20 feet of mahogany, and the room no longer looked like a man taking supper at the head of his own grave. "Who shortened the table?" he asked his manservant. "Her Grace thought you might dine easier, sir," the man said, and then, seeing the Duke's face, added carefully, "Shall I have the leaves put back?" The Duke of Windmarch looked for a long moment at the small, warm, sensible table that some invisible hand had made of his loneliness. "No," he said, "leave it." It was the first order he had given in 4 years that had anything in it of a man wishing to live. The muniment room lay at the end of the north passage, behind an oak door that Vosper kept locked, and to which every soul at Windmarch believed there was only one key, and Vosper wore it. So when the agent went to Kelby on the quarter-day business, expecting to be gone until dark, he locked the door behind him with the untroubled ease of a man locking his own strong-box, and he did not think of the forgotten Duchess at all. Eloan let the house settle to its afternoon quiet. Then she took the Colonel's worn key up the cold passage, and it turned in the old ward as though it had only been waiting, and she stepped into the one room at Windmarch where the truth was kept in writing. It was a small room, and it smelled of dust and sealing wax and old leather. The deeds were in their tin boxes on the high shelf. The estate books stood in a row below, bound in brown calf, and there, at the end of the row, was the thing that stopped her breath in her throat, because she had suspected it and dreaded it, and here it was in plain daylight. Prum. There were 2 rent rolls for the current year, not 1, 2, bound alike in the same brown calf, standing side by side like brothers. One was worn soft at the corners from much handling. One was clean. She should not have touched them. She knew she should not. She opened the clean one first. It was the fair copy, the book that was shown when a thing was shown. Rents received, all neat, the estate a little poor but honest, tenants paid up, repairs accounted for. The facing of the mere embankment, she saw, had been entered and paid for twice in 9 years. £40, the second time, last autumn. The very bank she had cut with her own hands to keep it from drowning the fold. And Widow Aldis's cottage roof at Low Fold, entered as mended 3 winters running. She had watched the rain come through that roof onto an old man's bed not a week past. She opened the worn one, and the worn one was the truth, and the truth was uglier than she had let herself imagine. Here were the rents, as they were truly gathered, higher, many of them, than the fair book confessed. A shilling squeezed out of this widow, 2 out of that small farmer at Lady Day, for nothing done to earn it, and the shillings appearing nowhere in the book that was shown. Here were repairs charged and never made. Here were leases, and this was the thing that turned her cold, because rents were theft, but leases were the estate itself. Parcels of Windmarch land written over on long lease to names she did not know, at rents 1/10 of their worth, the difference plainly gone into the agent's own pocket, and every one of them signed at the foot in a bold, confident hand, *Windmark, *. The Duke's name and the Duke 300 miles away, in a barracks these 4 years, signing nothing, reading nothing, grieving. It was not the Duke's hand at all. She had seen the Duke's true signature that very week, on the parish register where he had been made, belatedly to enter himself as returned. She knew its cramped, reluctant shape. This bold flourish was Vosper's, practiced and easy. The signature of a man who has written another man's name so many times, it has become a kind of second nature. One entry she read 3 times before she would believe it. The Ninewells pasture, 60 acres of the best grazing at Windmarch. The fields Sidney had ridden over every summer of her short life, leased clean away, on a term of 99 years, to a Kelby corn factor named Rook, at £11 a year when the grass was worth £11 a month. Rook. Eloan would have staked her cottage, had never set eyes on a blade of it. The lease was a shell, a name on a page and nothing behind it but Vosper. And behind Vosper, the slow, patient, hollowing out of everything the family had held for 200 years, field by field and roof by roof, while the last of that family sat over his solitary supper 3 rooms away and would not look. 4 years of it, at the least, not a servant pocketing spoons. A whole quiet river of a great house running out through one pleasant man's hand into no name at all, while its master would sooner die than open his dead sister's ledgers, and its tenants were too loyal and too frightened to complain, and its duchess had spent 4 years telling herself none of it was her affair. She heard the outer door. She had no time to think. She put the worn book back exactly as it had stood, corner to corner with its clean brother, and she was at the deed shelf with a slate in her hand and a candle at her elbow, counting tin boxes aloud, when the door opened and Mr. Rasta Gapirdia. Vosper came in from Kelby with the road dust on his shoulders and the rain in his hair, home 3 hours before she had reckoned on him. He stopped in the doorway. The pleasantness did not leave his face, it never left his face, but something behind it went very still. "Your Grace," he said, "I did not know the muniment room had been opened for you. I keep the only key." "Do you?" Lowen said, and did not look up from her slate. "Colonel Hartness sent me for the count of the plate deeds. He likes the inventory kept fresh, and he is too infirm to climb. I make it 11 boxes where the schedule says 12. She turned then and looked at him, level and gray and entirely without hurry. "You would know, of course, where the 12th is gone. It was a small stroke, and it landed." She watched him decide in the space of a breath, whether she was a fool who had wandered in by chance or a danger who had come in on purpose, and she watched him fail to be sure, which was exactly as much as she wanted him to fail. "An oversight in the schedule, no doubt," he said smoothly. "These old lists, I shall look into it." He came a step into the room, soft-footed for a heavy man, and shut the door gently behind him, and the shutting of it was the first threat, before ever he spoke. "Want a word, Your Grace, from an old servant to a new mistress. This is a large house with a great deal of dark in it, and a lady lately arrived to her. Position does well to be careful whose counsel she takes. The colonel is a fanciful old man. He hears voices that were never spoken." The smile held. "It would grieve me to see you set at odds with the household so soon. Companions and comforts come and go here, Your Grace. They do not last if they meddle. I should hate to see you go before your time." Eloan set down the slate. She looked at him, and she saw it under the smile for 1/2 second, plain as a figure in a column. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. He had come in smiling to frighten her, and it was his own fear that had brought him, because a clever woman with a slate and a candle had been standing too near his open books. "I keep excellent accounts, Mr. Vosper," she said pleasantly. "It is the one thing I have ever done that no one has managed to make me stop. Good evening." And she walked out past him with her slate unhurried into the cold passage. Her hands did not begin to shake until she had reached the stair, because she understood now, with the awful clarity of a sum that will not come out any other way, that she could not simply leave in the spring. The moment Vosper decided she was a danger and not a fool, and he was deciding it now, Behind that smile, climbing the stairs to his locked office to think, a forgotten wife with no protector and a maiden name cottage would be the easiest thing in the world to be rid of, quietly. Before she read anything aloud, she had 4 years' theft in her head and not one page of it yet in her hand. And she had just, by one small clever stroke too many, let the thief know she could count. He came upon her himself, a few evenings after, in a part of the house he had not set foot in for 4 years. He was a poor sleeper and had taken to walking the dark passages late, and he stopped in a doorway because a candle was burning where no candle had any business to be. It was the still room. Alowan stood at the scoured shelf, setting back a row of cleaned glass jars, and he saw the labels on them and knew the hand at once, round, careful, young, 4 years dead, and something moved across his shut face. "Those are my sisters," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." Alowan did not offer him a scrap of sympathy. She had learned that sympathy is the cheapest coin there is, and the one the grieving can least bear to be paid in. The cordials were spoiled, the jars were sound. It seemed a mean thing to pour her writing out with them, so I kept the labels. He looked at her a long moment. His friends saw a title and a purse. His servants got past him with their eyes on the floor. This small, brown-haired, easily overlooked woman looked back at him as though his rank were a fact about him no more remarkable than his height, and told him a plain, true thing about his dead sister without once reaching for his grief. And he found he had not been spoken to in that way, as a man, and not a wound, in 4 years. "Thank you," he said at last, stiffly, as though the words had rusted in him. After that, by no arrangement that either of them would have owned to, they began to meet. He was often in the old map room now of an evening, where the great estate plans hung in their frames, the one room of the house he could sit in without feeling watched by his own memories. And she came there on the household's errands, and stayed a little, and they talked. Not of anything, of the weather off the fells, of the drowned meadow drying out, of whether the near paddock would carry sheep. And slowly, over these small nothings, she learned him, and found the colonel had been exactly right. He was not a cold man. He was a man who had shut the windows against a grief so large he could not be in a room with it, and had forgotten in 4 years of shutting that a house with the windows shut too long stops being a place anyone can live. He spoke of Sidney once, and once only. It was late, the fire almost out, and he did not look at Elowen while he said it. "I was with the regiment in the peninsula when she took the fever. The letter followed me 3 weeks. By the time I had leave and a ship and the North Road under me, she was a month in the ground at Windmarch Church." He turned an old surveyor's compass over in his hands, round and round. "There was a matter that kept me from sailing at once. A court-martial I was wanted for, a witness, 3 days. I have never once, since, been able to remember what the man was charged with. 3 days. I stayed 3 days." He set the compass down. "I could not come into this house and find her not in it, so I did not come in at all. 4 years, I told myself the estate ran on without me, because a man tells himself the thing that lets him sleep. Alowan did not say that she was sorry. She said, 'It did not run on without you. It was carried. There is a difference, and you will not like who carried it, nor how much they took for the carrying.' It was as near as she had yet come to the 2 brown books in the muniment room, and she watched him hear it, and watched him not quite be ready. 'You carry a great deal of it yourself,' he said instead, which was his way of turning from the edge. 'The table, the chimney, my father's brother, who has not had a civil word from this family in a decade, and has one from you daily. Why? It is not your house.' There it was, the question she could not answer with the whole truth, because the whole truth was folded in oilskin under the darning wool in an iron box, and it said, Aster A, I am leaving you the moment you sign my release. So she gave him a true thing that was not that thing. 'Because I cannot watch a house drown when I know where the sluice is,' she said. 'Figures don't lie, Your Grace, and neither does water. Both of them find their level in the end. I would rather choose the cut than wait for the burst. Something touched the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but the ghost of the muscle. A smile would have used. You would have made a formidable engineer. I was raised to be one, she said, before I was sold to be a duchess. And she gathered her basket and went and did not see him sit. A long time after, by the dead fire, looking at the door she had gone through, as though a window in a shut house had blown quietly open. He asked Vosper, the next morning, to bring him the rent rolls. Vosper did not bring the rent rolls. He brought reasons. The books were being written up fair for the quarter. The figures were in 100 loose memoranda that would only confuse his grace. There was nothing in them a gentleman need trouble his grief with, and everything in them a faithful servant was glad to carry so that his grace need not. He said all of it warmly, and he said it 3 mornings running. And each morning the Duke, who was after all still 4 years asleep and glad of any excuse to close his eyes again, let himself be turned from the door. It was the Colonel who broke it, because the Colonel had waited 9 years for a Duke to come home and would not watch this one fall back to sleep in the hall. He did it at dinner, before the London friends, in the too loud flat voice of a man who cannot judge his own volume and has stopped caring to. Alaric, he said into a lull. Who runs your house? The Duke, discomfited, said that Vosper ran the estate and the household ran itself. The household, said the Colonel, has run itself into new-swept chimneys, mended linen, hot coffee, a dry harvest, and an old deaf man who is no longer cold at night, and it did all that in a fortnight, after doing none of it in 4 years. Houses do not mend themselves, boy. Someone mends them. You're eating off her management this minute, and you have not troubled to ask her name. He set down his glass. Her name is Elowen. She is your wife. And if you had the sense your sister had, you would give her in law what she has already taken. In fact, before the man who has been robbing you notices she is the only person at this table he is afraid of. The word robbing asterisk fell into the room and lay there. The fair-haired friend stopped smiling. The Duke looked down the table at Elowen, who had gone very still with her eyes on her plate, not from fear, he saw, but from the particular stillness of a person who has been carrying a heavy thing a long way and has just heard someone else, at last, offer to notice its weight. He did not decide it that night. He was not a man who decided quickly anymore. But 2 days later he sent for her to the map room, and Vosper was there, having been sent for too, and the Duke had a paper in front of him in his own cramped, reluctant hand. For Michaelmas, the Duke said, Her Grace has the running of the household and the still-room and the home farm, on my authority and under my name. Every household account will be posted to her weekly and will carry her countersignature before it is paid. Nothing leaves this estate in coin that she has not seen. He slid the paper across to Vosper to be entered in the books. You will show her whatever she asks to see, Mr. Vosper. All of it. It was not the keys of the house handed over on a velvet cushion. It was something Vosper found far worse, a second pair of eyes fixed permanently on the one place he could not afford to be seen, and a countersignature standing between his pen and every shilling. He took the paper and smiled and said he was heartily glad of the help. Her Grace would find everything in the plainest order, and he went out of the room with the pleasantness sitting on his face like frost on a window. When he had gone, the Duke looked at Elowen across the map room, and for a moment seemed about to say a thing that had nothing to do with accounts. You did not want this, he said, the countersignature. You went very still when my uncle spoke of it. I did not want to be noticed, Elowen said, which was true, and not the whole of it. A woman who is noticed is a woman who can be found. Found by whom? And there it was, the door onto all of it, the fen, the attorney, the cottage, the 4 years she had spent quietly planning her way out of his life, and she stood on the sill of it, and did not go through. By anyone with cause to look, she said, and gathered her papers, and left him wondering, as she meant him to, and disliking herself a little for the wondering. because he had begun this fortnight to be kind, and she had begun to be sorry that he had. Elowen knew, with the cold certainty of a level laid against a wall, that she had just been made the exact obstacle a patient thief removes. He would not wait for Michaelmas. He would move before her countersignature ever touched a page, and he would need first to make quite sure that when she spoke, no one at Windmarch would believe a word she said. That same week, a traveling carriage that was not a stranger's came up the North Drive. The Duke's cousin had arrived. Her name was Mrs. Ottiline Sartain, and she was the daughter of the old Duke's sister, the returned Duke's first cousin. 35, handsome in the hard, bright way of a woman who has learned that softness is a luxury of the secure. Her father had gambled the family portion into the sea. Her husband had died and left her a widow's pittance that shrank with every quarter day, and a name that opened doors into rooms she could no longer afford to stand in. Since Sidonie's death, she had come to Windmarch oftener and stayed longer, and she had come this time meaning to stay for good, because a grieving bachelor cousin with a great empty house and a wife nobody counted was, to a clever, desperate woman, an opportunity wearing the coat of a family duty. She had thought her way to it plainly. The marriage was a lawyer's arrangement. 4 years cold. Never, the servant said, anything at all. Such a marriage might be quietly undone, given a compliant duke and an embarrassing enough wife. And when it was undone, who so fit to be true mistress of Windmarch as the Duke's own blood, who understood the county, who would be so grateful, so useful, so permanent? She had settled her small debts these 4 years through Mr. Setter, Vosper's good offices, quietly, out of the estate's quiet river, and Mr. Vosper had settled them because a friend near the Duke's ear was worth more to him than the money. Each propped the other. Neither had ever said so aloud. They understood one another perfectly, and within 2 days of her coming they had, without a single incautious word, renewed the old treaty. Vosper found her in the long gallery admiring the portraits she meant one day to own, and remarked only that her Grace, the new Duchess, was a wonderfully diligent woman, quite tireless in the accounts, and that diligence in a wife was a rare thing and no doubt a comfort to them all. A great comfort, Ottiline agreed, studying his pleasant face. One wonders she troubled to marry at all, being so fond of ledgers. One does wonder, said Vosper gently, where a drainer's daughter learned to love a ledger so. And that was the whole of it. Each had told the other precisely where to dig, and neither had said a word that could ever be repeated back to them. She saw within a day what 4 years' theft had never shown Vosper, that the small brown Duchess was not merely competent, she was concealing something. It took one clever, watchful, frightened woman to know another. Caro, she said over the Colonel's tea, turning the maiden name on her tongue like a sugared almond. Elowen Caro. From the Fens, they tell me, a drainer's daughter. Her smile was wide and reached nothing above it. How singular! To be born to mud and married to a coronet. One is neither one thing nor the other, not gentry, not servant, always to be watched for the false step. It must be exhausting, my dear. I do watch, you know. My cousin thinks me an idle woman, but watching is my one accomplishment. I have nothing else left to do with my days. Then you keep better accounts than I do, ma'am, Elowen said pleasantly, for I never learned the trick of watching people. I only ever learned to watch the water. And the Colonel, from the depths of his chair, made a sound that, in a less dignified man, would have been a laugh. Mrs. Sartain set down her cup, unhurried, and tried once more. Very softly. My cousin was so long away, she said. 4 years. A great while for a bride to sit alone in a cold house. One would forgive a clever wife a good deal, situated so, a little money put by against the winter, a friend in the law, a plan of her own. One would hardly blame her for it. One would hardly, Elowen agreed pleasantly and poured the Colonel his tea and gave her nothing, not a flush, not a flicker, because she had learned at a breaking bank that the surest way to lose is to let a frightened thing see that it has frightened you. But Eloan went up to the north gable that night and stood a long time over the iron box, because she had heard the true thing under the tea-table talk. Adeline had not asked, "Who are you?" She had said, "Asterisk, I know what you are hiding, and I mean to find the shape of it. Asterisk, and a secret found by an enemy is no longer a secret. It is a weapon, and it points whichever way the enemy chooses. She was right to be afraid." Within the week, Mrs. Sarton had written 3 letters south to a cousin married to an attorney in the Fen country, in the mild way of family keeping in touch, asking, had anyone heard of a Miss Eloan Caro, a drainer's daughter, and did she perhaps still hold property thereabouts, and under what name, and by whose hand? The Fen is a slow country, and its lawyers are slower, but answers come in the end to those with the patience to wait for them. And Adeline Sarton had learned patience in the hardest school there is, which is genteel poverty. The fuse was lit. It only wanted the 6 weeks. It takes a letter to cross England twice. It came, as such things always come, all on the one morning, and each piece of it arriving as though the others had planned it, though not one of them had. Vosper had run out of month. His countersignature came into force at Michaelmas, and Michaelmas was Friday, and so on the Wednesday he brought to the map room a fat leather folder of what he called the quarter settlements, routine papers, he said. A season's leases and releases, wanting only the ducal signature before the accounts could be closed and posted fair to her grace as arranged. He had chosen his moment with a craftsman's care. The Duke was tired that morning and easily led. The fair-haired friend was there bored, urging him to sign the wretched things and come out shooting, and Mrs. Dabb Sarton stood by the window with a letter of her own in her hand, arrived that dawn from the Fens, and a look on her face like a woman about to be paid a long-out debt. The papers, of course, were the whole of Vosper's theft made lawful, the forged leases of Ninewells and the rest, wanting now only a true asterisk signature over the false ones to put them forever beyond challenge. He had judged that a sleeping duke would sign a folder sooner than read it, exactly as a sleeping duke had signed everything for 4 years. He was very nearly right. Eloan came in as the pen was being dipped. She had a household paper to countersign. She had made sure of it, had haunted the passage all morning, and she saw the folder, and she saw Vosper's hand steadying the Duke's blotter, and she said, quite calmly, into the warm, idle room, "I would not sign that, your grace, until I had read every word of it, particularly the leases." The room turned, and Adeline Sarton, who had waited 4 years for a moment worth spending, spent it now.
"How very like you to say so,"
she said, sweet and clear. "You who have read a great deal in this house that was never yours to read. Cousin, before you take counsel from your wife on what to sign, you had best know what manner of woman is giving it." She lifted her letter. "Eloan Caro, a drainer's daughter, married to you 4 years ago for your name and your coronet, who has kept from you all that while a second life entire. She has money of her own you never gave her, hidden away. She has bought a cottage in her maiden name, in secret, through an attorney she has been writing to behind your back this 12-month. She has a bag packed, cousin, in all but the leather. She has been making ready to desert you the day it suited her. And she has spent these weeks creeping into your muniment room with a stolen key, by her own confession, copying your private accounts page by page, in her own hand. A hidden fortune, a hidden name, a hidden plan to leave, and a very great and secret interest in your ledgers. She let it fall softly. One does ask oneself, cousin, what a woman conceals so much money to scrub your linen, and whose accounts exactly she has been so busy copying, and to what end? Every word of it was true. That was the terrible artistry of it. Vosper had not needed to lie about the theft. He had needed only to let a true woman be described in the language of a false one, and let a wounded man draw the picture himself. and the Duke drew it. Elowen watched him do it. She watched his face, which had, this fortnight past, been coming so carefully awake, go shut again, board by board, the way a house is boarded against a coming storm. A wife who had hidden a fortune. A wife who had hidden her name. A wife who had a secret door built and a secret purse filled, and had never in a month of firelit evenings said one word of it to him, who had let him speak of his dead sister into the dark, and had given him nothing back but a locked box. Everything the cousin said fit what he knew, and the one thing he could not see, because grief had taught him to expect abandonment and call it wisdom, was the reason under the reasons. "Is it true?" he said. His voice had gone very quiet down to the timbre. "The cottage, the money, the plan to leave." "Yes," said Elowen, "all of it is true." For a moment she watched what the 3 words did to him, and it was worse than anger would have been. He did not rage. He simply withdrew, the way the tide goes out and leaves the flats gray and bare. A man confirming to himself the thing he had always secretly believed, that people leave, that warmth is only the short prologue to abandonment, that he had been a fool for a fortnight to imagine a shut house could be lived in again. She had done that to him. Not the lie of it, for there was no lie, but the shape she had let him give, the truth by keeping silent. She had let him speak his sister into the dark, and had kept her own box locked, and now an enemy was reading the locked box aloud, and every true thing in it cut, because she had not been the one to hand it to him. The fair-haired friend looked at his boots. Bosper very gently moved the folder half an inch nearer the pen. Because a man who is being betrayed by his wife does not stop to read leases, and the whole game now was to get the thing signed inside the next 2 minutes while the Duke's face was still a shut door. And Elowen stood among them, exposed to the last seam, 4 years of careful invisibility torn open in a warm room full of people who had already decided what she was, and found to her own great astonishment that she was not afraid. She had dreaded this moment for 4 years, the moment of being wholly seen, and here it was, and the ceiling had not fallen. There was only the truth left in the room. And the truth, whatever it cost her, was the one ground she had ever been able to stand on and not sink. "Every word my husband's cousin has said is true," she said, and her voice went out level and unhurried across the room, the voice she had used on 15 frightened men at a breaking bank. "And every word of it has been told to you the wrong way round. Give me 4 minutes, your grace, before you give him your name. If at the end of them you still wish me gone, I will go this hour, and you need never set eyes on me again. I have a cottage ready, as she says, and I have never in my life needed any man's roof less than I need yours. But you will not sign that folder first, because the moment you do, you are not signing away a scheming wife. You are signing away Ninewells in the fold, and your sister's own fields to the man standing at your elbow, in your own hand, over his forgery, past all undoing. 4 minutes? Then throw me out if you like, but read first. You have signed unread for 4 years, and look what it has bought you." She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life won anything by raising it. "You are afraid of being left," she said more quietly, so that it was almost only for him. "I know the look of it. I have worn it myself, in a colder gable than any room you have ever slept in. So I will tell you the one thing a frightened man can hear. I built my door because you gave me no reason to want another. Read the folder and give me a reason, and we need neither of us find out tonight whether I would ever have walked through it." For one long breath, nobody moved. Then the Duke of Windmarch set down the pen. "Show me," he said. It took the rest of that day, and most of the night, and it was Elowen's 4 years of patience laid out on the map-room table for any honest man to read. She sent for her iron box, and she opened it before them all, and she took out not the deed and the attorney's letters. Those she set aside, saying only, "That is my freedom, and I will account for it when the estate is safe, and not before. But the other thing, the thing she had built a shilling of proof at a time, the kitchen book in her own hand, the tradesman's true prices set against Vosper's posted ones, the tenants' rents, as truly gathered against the rents the fair book confessed. And then, with the colonel's worn key, she opened the muniment room in front of the Duke himself, and brought out the 2 brown rent rolls, and laid them side by side on the table, the clean one and the worn one, brothers at last in the light. It was not lost on the Duke, though he said nothing of it until much later, that she had opened, in front of the very household she was said to be deserting, the box that held her escape, and had reached straight past her own freedom to lift out his rescue. She had spent 4 years building a door out of his house. The first use she made of it, thrown wide, was to save the house she had built it to leave. The Duke read them the way she had read them, slowly, from the outside in, and he was, whatever else grief had made of him, not a stupid man. He saw the twin books standing side by side. He saw Ninewells, his sister's own field, leased 99 years to a rook who had never trodden it, for £11 a year when it was worth 11 a month. He saw Widow Aldous charged 3 winters for a roof that let the rain onto her brother's bed. He saw the mere embankment paid for twice, and faced, not once, the very bank his wife had cut open with her own hands to keep it from drowning 8 cottages while he slept 300 miles off. He turned the pages, and the room was silent around him except for the small, dry sound of them, and with each one his face changed, a little more, the way a shut-house changes when someone goes through it at last and opens every window in turn, and he saw, at the foot of every stolen lease, his own name in a bold and confident hand. "That is not my signature," he said. "No," said Eloin, "it is his. He has written your name so many years he does it better than you do." She laid beside it the parish register, his own cramped, true hand. A child could have seen the 2 hands were not one hand. It was old Wren the Duke sent out into the wet dark, and Wren who came back near 10 with the tradesmen of the parish in their Sunday coats, roused from their firesides and uneasy under the map-room's painted ceiling. One by one they laid their own tally-sticks and daybooks on the great table beside Eloin's fair copies, and one by one they swore to the figures the butcher paid 9 shillings a week and posted at 14. The chandler, the Kelby carrier, and Rook, the corn factor, who went the color of tallow, and confessed in a low voice that he had put his name to a lease for a field he had never walked, because Mr. Vosper had asked it as a small favor between friends, and forgiven him an old debt in the asking. Then Wren brought in the tenants, and this was the part the Duke would remember longest. Widow Aldous came on the old foreman's arm, 70 years old and frightened of the great house, and she stood at the foot of the shining table and made her mark under a plain statement of the rent she had truly paid, and the roof she had truly never had. She looked at the Duke, not accusing, only sorry, and said, "We didn't like to trouble you, your grace, not with your grief. We took it. The raising was your need." And the Duke of Windmarch, who had let a thief charge an old woman 3 winters for a roof over her dying brother, while he taught himself to feel nothing 300 miles away, put his hand over his mouth and for a moment could not answer her at all, because there is nothing a man can say to that and keep his voice. And near midnight the colonel himself came down on Eloin's arm and stood at the head of the table, and said in his flat carrying voice, to the one man in the room who had spent 9 years believing a deaf man saw nothing, "I have watched you rob this family since my brother died, Mr. Ger. Vosper, I could not hear you do it. I could read every word of it off your lips. I have it all written down, 9 years of it. I was only ever waiting for a Duke awake enough to be told." Vosper stopped smiling. It was the first time in years anyone at Windmarch had seen it, and it aged him 10 years in a moment. He made one last soft attempt. The fair book was the only book. The young lady was clever but mistaken. An agent's accounts were no matter for a duchess. But a man cannot talk a tally-stick out of a butcher's honest hand, and he knew it, and the knowing was in his face. The Duke closed the worn book. He set his palm flat on the cover, on his sister's stolen fields, on the 4 years he had refused to open, and when he spoke it was not to Vosper at all. She kept these fair, he said to no one. To Sidony, to the shut east wing. She kept every field of it fair, and I would not read her hand after she died, because reading it meant she was gone. So I let a thief keep my books because he did not remind me of her. He looked up, and his face was terrible and, for the first time in 4 years, entirely awake. Get out of my house tonight, Mr. Vosper. You will be before the Kelby bench by noon. Every figure this lady has taken goes with you, and every shilling you have had off my tenants you will render back or answer for it as the law answers such men. Wren, see him pack. Do not let him near the muniment room. Vosper went in the end, because there was nothing else left to do. At the door he turned once, all the pleasantness gone out of him at last, and looked at Eloan with a hatred that had no smile to hide behind. You could not simply keep to the linen, he said. No, Eloan agreed. I never could. Good night, Mr. Vosper. That left Adeline Sarton, who had sat through the long reckoning very upright in the corner, her letter from the fens crushed to a rag in her lap, watching the machine she had helped to build come apart in the candlelight plank by plank. And, when Vosper was gone, she rose, and she was still handsome and still upright, and she made her last throw with the courage of a gambler staking the rent. You will turn me out too, I suppose, she said to the Duke. Your loyal cousin, who settled her little debts through your steward. Oh, I knew where the money came from. A woman as poor as I am always knows exactly where every shilling comes from. It is the rich who have the luxury of not asking. Her voice was bright and brittle as struck glass. Turn me out, then. Where to, cousin? I have £80 a year and a widow's cap, and a name that gets me invited to houses I cannot afford the coach fare to reach. You have never once in your life not known where you would sleep. You cannot imagine how tiring it is. 15 years I have been afraid. It is such tiring work, being afraid. Do not look at me as though I were a monster. I am only frightened, and I have been frightened so long I have forgotten the difference. You think I chose this. No one chooses it. You are handed a name too large for your purse, and told to keep up the show, or drown quietly where the family need not watch you splash. I have been drowning quietly for 15 years in rooms full of people who were once my equals. Do not mistake me for wicked, cousin. I am only tired, and the tired do cruel things to keep their heads above the water. And there it was, the true thing, under the bright, hard shell, laid bare in the candlelight. The Duke's face had gone hard as the drive again, and he opened his mouth, and Eloan saw that he was about to be just, and that just would finish Adeline Sarton forever, cast off, disgraced, £80 and a widow's cap in the county to feed on it. Your Grace, Eloan said, if I may. He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Loan crossed the room to the frightened, upright, hateful woman who had torn her open before the household not 6 hours since, and she did not gloat, because she had learned long ago that gloating is the one thing your enemy is braced for. And she had never once in her life given an enemy what they were braced for. You settled your debts through the estate, Eloan said quietly. That is theft, and you know it is theft, and so does his Grace. But you falsified no rents, you squeezed no widow for a shilling at Lady Day. That was Vosper's hand, not yours. You watched, and you profited by the watching, and you held your tongue, which is exactly the sin I committed myself for 4 years, so I am poorly placed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes. You are clever, and you are tired, and cleverness with nothing to do curdles into what you did this morning, so I will give it something to do. The still-room and the dairy at Windmarch could be made to pay. Cheeses, cordials, honey. The old receipts your cousin Sidney wrote out and never lived to sell. Run them, not as a pensioner and not as a poor relation, but as the woman who holds them, on a share of what they earn. so that in 3 years you have money that is yours because you made it and need be afraid of no one. You would owe it to me least of all. I should like that understood." Adeline stared at her as though she had been struck. Whatever she had braced herself to meet, it had not been this, and it undid her where justice never could have.
"Why?"
she said. It was not a graceful question. It was torn out of her. "Because I know precisely how tiring it is," Eloan said. "And because a house that has just put out one thief should not warm itself by making a beggar. Good night, Mrs. Sarton." Adeline Sarton did not answer. She looked at the offered hand of the woman she had tried that morning to destroy, and something in her face broke and did not quite mend, and she went out of the map room without another word, which from her was a kind of surrender and a kind of thanks. The Duke had watched the whole of it in silence from beside the dead fire. When the door had shut, he said low, "I would have ruined her." "I know," said Eloan, "you would have been just." Justice is what grief reaches for when it can no longer reach for anything kinder. But she is not the thief, your grace. She is only what the thief could use, a frightened woman with nowhere to stand. There were 3 of those in this house a year ago, and I was one of them. He looked at her a long time. "And now," she said, "there are none. I have seen to it. They kept the harvest home at Wimmarch that year for the first time since Sidoney died. The long trestle set up in the very tithe barn she had saved, dry now on its 4 feet of grace, and hung with the last of the corn. The whole parish come up to Honey Drive to eat the Duke's beef and look frankly, and at last at the woman who ran his house. For the county knew the whole of it by then. Who had cut the bank, who had kept the fair books, who had put out the thief. A great house leaks like a bad roof, and the story of the forgotten Duchess had gone round every hearth from Kelby to the sea. When she came in on the Duke's arm, the tenants stood, which is a thing tenants do for no one. They are told to honor and everyone they have chosen. He had asked her, the evening before, at the mended bank above the mere. It was the place she went at dusk, out of old habit, with the brass rule in her pocket, to read the water down against the marker stones, and he had learned, this autumn, where to find her. "Your attorney in Kelby wrote to me," he said. "The release you wanted. I have his letter. It wants only my hand, and you shall have it tonight if you ask. I will not keep a woman by law who was kept by nothing else." He looked out at the darkening water. "I have signed a great deal this year. I never read. This one I have read very carefully. It is the only paper in the world I would rather not sign, and the only one I have no right to refuse. So I am not going to offer you anything, Eloan. You have your own money and your own name and your own roof in the fens, and there is not one thing left under this sky that you need me for. I made very sure of that by forgetting you, though I did not mean to make you free. I only meant to be cruel by accident, which is the worst kind, and the kind that never even notices the wound it leaves." "Then why are you standing in my dusk?" Eloan said. "If you have nothing to offer." "Because I would like to spend the rest of my life," he said, "being looked at the way you looked at me over my sister's jars, as a man, and not a grief, and not a coronet, and not a signature on a lawyer's paper. You are the one soul in 4 years who never once needed anything of me, and so you are the one soul whose staying would mean you had chosen it. I forgot I had a wife, and I have been more ashamed of that sentence than of anything I did in the war. I am asking you not to be my Duchess. You are that already, and better at it than I am at being Duke, but to stay because you would rather stay than go. And if you would rather go, I will hand you the release tonight, and thank heaven I woke in time to know what I was losing." Something eased at the corner of his mouth. "It is entirely yours to say. Everything from here is yours to say." Eloan looked at him a long moment across the falling light, level and gray and unafraid, the very look she had turned on him from the mud of the drowned meadow on the first hour of the first day, when he had told his friends he had forgotten he had a wife at all. "Alaric," she said. She had never once used his name. He heard her use it, and something crossed his face worth more than the whole of Ninewells and the honeyed land it stood on. I have my own roof, and my own money, and my own name, she said. And you are quite right that I need none of you. I spent 4 years making sure of it, and I would not give up 1 shilling or 1 stone of it, not even for you. A woman ought to keep the one door that is only hers. So understand what I am telling you. I am not staying because I cannot leave. I am staying because I have read this account very carefully, on both sides, in my own hand, and it comes out, to my great surprise, in your favor. The almost smile was on her own mouth now, and she let it come. Figures don't lie, Your Grace, and neither, it seems, does this. Yes, I will stay, choosing it. They were married again in the spring, quietly at Winmarch Church where Sidonie lay. The colonel's notion, who said a vow made once in the dark by 2 strangers, ought to be made again in daylight by 2 people who had at last met. Ninewells came back. The forged lease void the moment a true hand disowned it. What Vosper had squeezed from the tenants was reckoned to the last shilling and given back, cottage by cottage, the Duke making good from his own pocket what the man himself could not, and counting it cheap. Widow Aldis's roof was mended before the frosts by the Kelby man actually paid to mend it, not a shilling over what it truly cost. Elowen kept her cottage on Senate's Drove. She let it to a drainer's widow at a rent that was really a gift, but she never signed it away. A woman should always know where her own door is, she said, even if she never has to walk through it. And the Duke, who had learned that year exactly what it cost to be a man no one chooses freely, never once asked her to give it up. Mrs. Sarton made the Winmarch dairy pay inside 2 years, and grew, if not gentle, then far less afraid. The colonel lived 3 winters more, warm, and read the whole of it off the lips of a happy house, and pronounced himself satisfied. And at the harvest home, when the ale was low and the fiddles had started and the parish was watching, the Duke of Winmarch stood up before the whole county and did the thing he had never done. He named her, plainly his wife, and thanked her by name for the harvest in the barn and the truth in the books and the bank she had cut with her own 2 hands. It was someone counted. Barely a season since he had stood on a rise above a drowned meadow and confessed to his friends that he had forgotten he had a wife at all. He would not forget her again. The whole county was his witness that he could not, and Elowen, who had come north to be nobody's, and had made herself by her own patient hand into a woman the county would stand up for, found that she did not mind in the least being remembered. It was a strange discovery at the end of it, and she turned it over, the way she turned a sum that had come out right against all her expectation, that she had spent 4 years learning not to need anyone, and had been correct to, and that needing no one was not the opposite of love, after all. It was only the ground you had to be standing on to be sure the love was real.